Hi there, this is Mike Gonzalez with Green Party Media, and today we're here with Brian Setzler. Brian Setzler is a founding member of the Pacific Green Party. Um, Brian, why don't you tell us a little bit about yourself?
Great. Thanks for having me on here. I'm excited to talk about these things today. I'll tell you about my green history, which is in 1990, I heard about the Green Party. We were starting to get involved in Gulf War I, and I realized we needed an alternative. The people I was mostly voting for at that time, I was younger. I thought pro-choice was my litmus test, and I was voting for people who were pro-choice, but then they were also for things that I totally didn't agree with, such as bombing other people, the war on drugs, decimating our forests out here, and really the Green Party, when I heard about it, was a breath of fresh air, and I've been a green and an active green ever since. Along the way, I've learned some valuable lessons, and I'm excited to share them. I think they really have been some things that every green should know. And one of them I'll start with is, you said, who should we talk to? And when I am out there in the world, and by the way, when we started the Green Party here in Oregon, I collected probably over 10,000 signatures myself to get us on the ballot. So I've talked to lots of people. And along the way, I think of everybody on a scale of greenness as -10 to +10. And I've never met a +10. Maybe some indigenous person who lives in the woods would be a +10 that's completely off the grid. I haven't met them. So we're all on that gradient somewhere. None of us are great or perfect. And really, first, our job is for us individually, is to move ourselves along that green scale. We all have our own blind spots of where we could personally be greener, unplug from corporations, simplify our lives, de-indigenize ourselves. I don't know what that is, and for everybody it's a little bit different, but there's things we individually can do, and to not be blind about our own shortcomings on that scale, that we all have work to do. Second thing is, whenever I meet somebody, I don't care if they're -10 or where they are on that scale, my job, I feel like my goal of that interaction is, to be a human being with them, but then to help move them along the green scale. I don't expect somebody who's a -2 on the green scale to overnight leap to a 6, right? But if they take a step from -2 to -1, I'm not going to condemn them for what they're not doing. Okay? Because I meet people all along that gradient and stuff. I also would say, just another little thing, piece of background. When I got into college and I took Poli-Sci 101, this was in the early 80s, and I was a young guy, I really knew not much about politics. There's Democrats and Republicans. I was a naive guy. But I remember the guy talking Poli-Sci, and he said, this is our political spectrum. It's a bell curve, right? You got from left to right, and the most people are in the middle. That's how a bell curve works. And that's our body politics. And really, the reason the two-party system, the reason they're so much alike is because most of the people are in the middle. This is where the winning votes come from, is in the middle in a two-party system. And so both parties are trying to appeal to that big spectrum in the middle. And the further out they go, to their radical side, whether it's the Democrats on the left or the Republicans on the so-called right, the more they go out to either side, the less they get away from the middle and the more likely they are to lose, right? That's one thing I learned. Another thing I learned, Poli-Sci 101, is that these two wings, the left and the right, when you get way out there to the extreme, they almost kind of bend around and touch each other. So far, far, far left and far, far, far right are almost identical in some ways, along the lines. But this is an important thing. And then another thing I learned there was that, and the reason then if we came up with a good idea, the role of third parties historically in this two-party system, and this is created by the rules of the structure of the system. This isn't come out of God's, God or somewhere. This is because the rules of the system are that winner take all. This is what ends up happening in a two-party system. The other thing I learned is as one of the wings has a good idea, as it builds up momentum and start siphoning people away from the main parties in the two-party system, eventually that party, the two main parties, one of them will adopt that third-party position and kind of take the wind out of their sails. So, you know, like we could, if we were to grow, let's say, on the issue of single-payer healthcare, and that really took off and really got traction for us, if we were to start to see success on it at some point, the Democrats would automatically co-opt that as just as a move. The other thing I learned was that voting was mostly meaningless. And when I say this, back in the day, the poli-sci professor, poli-sci 101, said, you know, if I was in Washington at the time, if in Washington you could go into a voting booth, and this was back in the days when there was voting booths, and you were able to pull the lever every 30 seconds from when the voting booth opened till when it closed, you got to vote that many times. So you got to personally vote every 30 seconds. You wouldn't have made a difference in a single race in Washington over the last decade prior to that or something. You know, it just to show you that your individual vote, because of the sheer vastness of numbers, is pretty meaningless, you know. But I'm not saying don't vote, but just recognize that it's not a huge leverage point in the system. There's also gerrymandering and these other things. And so what he said was, what really can increase your power is doing things where there's leverage. By volunteering, you multiply your votes, you know, for that candidate. By giving money, time, other things you can do. I remember mentioning assassination. You want to have a political impact, assassination has an impact much more greater than voting. I'm not advocating assassination. I'm just saying as, you know, a step that would have a big deal. So lastly, I want to come to this, tie all this together and who we should be talking to. And really, we should be talking to everybody. So everybody is our chance to, you know, move somebody from -10 to +10 and help them on the green scale. But I want to share a lesson I learned that I think is super important, and I call it the middle of the sugar pile. And that is, if you take a dispenser of a sugar dispenser and you start pouring it onto a table, as it hits the table, the first granules bounce away from the pile. But as you keep pouring, you pretty soon begin to form a pile. And it looks a little bit like this. So we have the sugar dispenser, we're forming a pile, and we got little grains that have bounced away. Looking straight down on the top of it, it looks like, you know, a round thing with little grains that have bounced away. That's our political part. You know, that's our politics. It's neither left or right. Most people are in the middle. It matches up with this, but this is only on a 2-dimensional scale. The sugar pile is really 3-dimensional because it also has depth. But coming back to it, us that are greens, we're these little sugar. Now imagine in the sugar pile, each little granule of sugar is a human being, okay? Those of us that are radicalized or, you know, out in the Green Party, we've bounced away from the middle of the sugar pile. We're out here, we're vegetarians, you know, we're debating how many angels can dance on the head of a pin, and we're out here. The middle of the sugar pile is, again, who is electing the people of this country? The middle of the sugar pile believes war is an answer to problems. The middle of the sugar pile believes chemicals on our food are okay. The middle of the sugar pile believes people should have to work to get health care and food in this country of wealth. So the middle of the sugar pile is who's electing people. And when we sit over here, you and I, or the people who are greens, and we're out on the fringe and we've danced away or we bounced away from the middle of the sugar pile, and we're over here having our little debate. You should be a vegan. You should adopt MMI, you know, sex workers, these issues, they have no effect on the sugar pile. If I get you to become a, you know, I don't know what your diet is now, but if I get you to become a vegan, it probably has no effect on the middle of the sugar pile. Now, if I get my mom, who is smack dab in the middle of the sugar pile, to be a vegan, it shifts the whole sugar pile. Because everybody who's with her, all the grains, the way change happens, a lot of change happens is you see somebody doing new behavior and you try it. But until you see it, you're not going to, most people don't try things based on an intellectual idea. Usually they have to see somebody doing it before they're willing to take the risk and try these things. And that's a lot. But the point of it is like, we need to be reaching into the middle of the sugar pile. The white supremacists are reaching into the middle of the sugar pile. If some white supremacist out there in Charlottesville, get some other white supremacists to be a little more radical white supremacist, it doesn't really have any effect on the rest of us. But when those white supremacists reach in and get, somebody who's not currently a white supremacist, and they talk to them and they convince them for some reason that makes sense, that shifts the whole sugar pile. All of a sudden, that person who was just, in middle America, being a, banker, doctor, lawyer, construction worker, truck driver, bus mechanic, doesn't matter. When their minds change to all of a sudden becoming radicalized white supremacists, the people in their circle are going to be influenced as well. And that flip that to us, if we reach into the middle of the sugar pile and get people to become greens, when somebody starts recycling or becoming a vegetarian or becoming aware of militarism and waking up, they wake the people up around them. So my point, and I've really kind of done, and I'm welcome to ask or answer any questions, is, we should be talking to everybody, and we really should be going after the middle of the sugar pile.
That's interesting. That's interesting, Brian. So do you feel like it's Trump and his supporters that have really pushed into the middle of the sugar pile, and that's something we have failed to do?
Yes. The middle of the sugar pile, when I first, the gentleman who shared this idea with me, his name's Sharif Abdullah, and he wrote a book called The Power of One, and he also wrote a book called Creating a World Which Works for All, and he's a great resource and a phenomenal thinker. At the time he was talking about Rush Limbaugh and the power of Rush Limbaugh and Fox News, and they reach right into the middle of the sugar pile. The middle of the sugar pile is middle America. It doesn't have any particular color. It's not white or anything. It's multiracial, but it's the middle. It's just mainstream. They're the ones watching CNN and Fox and MSNBC. They're the ones reading Time Magazine and Newsweek and listening to NPR. They're the ones blissfully going about their role in empire of paying their taxes and doing their job. And, things may not look good, but they have a belief that everything's, around the corner going to get better and better and better, like, the mythology that we have.
Okay, so you mentioned something pretty interesting, and you said that they're watching particular media outlets. One thing that us on the left have a hard time doing is getting on the media. So how do we reach into the middle of the sugar pile? Like, how do we practically go and approach the middle of the sugar pile to have an effect?
That's a great question. And you're right. The reason we're shut out is because corporate America owns, the media, even if it's a so-called, progressive, left, liberal, whatever media, we know it's controlled by corporations. And I'll tell you, that's a great question. Ralph Nader, I heard him speak one time. This must have been 20 years ago, probably before the internet, right? But he said, every single movement that's been successful has been successful because it went door to door, neighbor to neighbor, person to person. He's talking about women's suffrage, farm worker, farm labor, civil rights movement. It wasn't done in the media. And what he said at the time, and I still think it's so true, he says that, we have the ability now to get an article or, get coverage in the New York Times and have 500,000 people read that article, right? But he said, how many times have you ever read a newspaper article and got motivated to take action, to do something? It just doesn't happen. And so it's this illusion that because we've communicated with 500,000 people, or 1 million or more with a Sunday New York Times piece, that anybody's mind has been changed. And for instance, we just had a nice article on the Green Party in the New York Times because they came to the Salt Lake City convention and wrote something up. I read it, but usually they're always going to have us in, they're always going to get the little twist that we're quirky and, and that how we cause Democrats to lose elections, or they always are going to put that spin on it because their job is to create controversy. Their job is to sell papers. It's not to illuminate or inform. So what should we do? I think you're doing it. We're creating media. This is one tool, but I also don't want to, I think we underestimate the power of talking to our neighbor, and it's so interesting when I look at green organizing, I always hear people often talking about like, well, I'm here in Oregon. And so like, well, we got a chapter going in Portland. Well, we need to get one going in Salem, and they think 60 miles away, or Bend 100 miles away, or these bigger little metropolitan areas, right? They're not big, but they're bigger than nowhere. But I'm like, why are we not just going to the next neighborhood over and the next town over, and building it that way? A green's a green wherever they are. So the illusion of geography, like being in the cities, is a piece. But I think we just need to go neighbor to neighbor.
Excellent. So one thing I think myself and probably a lot of other Greens believe is that by activism, that like by a show of example, that we can have an effect on the sugar pile. Do you agree with that?
Yes, I have. Personally, I'm a white guy who grew up in middle class America. Fortunate to have parents and grandparents that could help me get to college and all these things. And professionally, I'm a certified public accountant. I worked at Arthur Andersen and Coopers and Lybrand. Those are prestigious corporate institutions, and but everybody's capable of changing. None of us are the same today as we were yesterday. And David Cobb, I've heard him organizing and giving his rebel rouser speech. Don't ever be afraid to invite people to the revolution. We need to get everybody engaged here. And so I think we need to ask everybody. There's people who are going to clearly be unsupportive. Just move on. There's 1 million people who are looking for our message. Millions and millions of people who want a green message of democracy, peace, nonviolence, sustainability, a different world, one not so focused on corporatism and violence and consumerism. And a lot of that work's going to happen outside of the political process. That's another thing that's really important. It's like, we're both a party and a movement, and I don't separate the two. I just think that the party piece is something we do because we're Greens, and that's one lever. Before we started the Green Party in Oregon, because all ballot access is by the state. And so before we had ballot access in Oregon, we couldn't run candidates. I'd go to Ron Wyden, who's now Senator Wyden. He used to be my congressman, and I'd go see him in this would have been like the late 80s. And he lived in the most progressive, safe, Democratic district in the country, right? He's in liberal Portland. And I was like, Ron, when are we going to, end the drug war, especially, the marijuana thing? Oh God, that would be bad. And he was opposed to gay marriage for a long time, and like most Democrats, until it becomes politically expedient to flip their position. But I've lost my train of thought, but we just, I lost my train of thought where I was going. So.
Well, I'll tell you, Brian, I like what you said about reaching out to people that aren't in our political bubble, and that's where we're going to have the most effect, because we're going to pull them, and we'll probably pull some people with them. Hey, Brian, do you have any desire to run for office?
No. It's interesting. I've been asked that. Obviously, I can speak, and I get along well with people. It's not where I don't think it's where my gifts lie. And, I contribute hard to the Green Party and the Green movement, and I'm working on some other things, and I just don't think that's it. Right. And so I'm about helping campaigns, and I've done stuff, and And I guess I would never say no, but I also just, you know, I just privacy so much, you know, it's
Sure.
it's a tough thing. And I applaud people who do it. You know, I wish we had something when I first got involved in the Green Party. I mean, so many new ideas were thrown out, but we had ideas like, you know, maybe what if we picked our politicians like we did jurors, you know, and just went through the population. You're going to get a mix, some great, some bad. That's what we got now, you know.
Sure.
And but the other thing I got to say is we need to, as Greens, reinvent every single aspect of society, and we cannot wait for a utopian future when we're, you know, in power and then think we're going to grab the instruments of power in this society, well, what we think are the instruments of power, the legislature and executive branch. That's not how change happens. And that's an important thing for Greens to know. I mean, the way change happens is through a lot of things happening at the grassroots until something comes up bigger and bigger and bigger. And the example I'll use is bicycling in Portland, or I could also use recycling in Portland. That went from nothing, you know, very small activity going on, to us being world leaders in those areas at one point for those. And those both, they were a combination of the government did come in and do things, but at first it was a lot of people just solving problems outside the government because the government wasn't interested. You know, there's not a market for recycling. Nobody will do it. We're not interested. So people did it on their own, and they got little recycling centers going. And you know, as that became a viable business, you know, nonprofit business or whatever, but had money and was doing things and stuff, slowly more and more things came on, you know, and as more and more stuff came on, eventually it started to get the government's attention. And then, you know, the next step and the next step and the next step. And things are incremental. The way we're going to get to the future is the same way we got here. We got here step by step by step by step by step to today. And the way we're going to get somewhere else is step by step by step. It's not some huge leap and then we're in, you know, nirvana. I heard a story, and I don't know if it's true, but like down in California, I believe it's true, but down, and to kind of illustrate this point, it was down in California in the 70s when the first energy crisis happened. They wanted to put solar hot water on all the homes, right? Makes sense. California's got a lot of sun. Well, so they instantly passed legislation to have that happen. But you took a market that was just tiny, and all of a sudden you passed government regulations that, you know, were told everybody everywhere how to do it one way. It just blew up the system. People couldn't get parts. There wasn't flexibility. You know, there weren't alternatives because there hadn't been the trial and error of innovation of this works, this doesn't, try that. We've been down that path, you know, all these things. Instead, it was just trying to go from 0 to 100 overnight. And of course, it failed. We're going through the same thing right now in Portland as I think about it. We just got introduced these little scooters. I don't know if you have them in your city or you've seen them. But they've been here maybe 2 weeks, maybe 3 weeks. And man, are they causing problems, right? People don't like them. So I ride them. I don't own a car. So once in a while I grab one, and they're a slick little way to get around and efficient and low cost. But I also see the other side of them zipping around. They're kind of like gnats that you're not used to. Well, the point is, these went from 0 to 100 overnight. Nobody's gotten used to what's the social aspect of it. Do you ride on the sidewalk? Do you bing your bell? Do you not? I mean, there are rules, but you know, who follows the official rules, right?
Right.
So we underestimate. I say the same thing on co-ops. I've helped start a number of co-ops. And all the people who come in and talk about socialism and anti-capitalism, I'm like, well, what are you for? You know, and when I hear them talk about like cooperative owned businesses, I'm like, have you worked in one? Have you started one? What's stopping you? If you think this is the, you know, the biggest thing in the world, capitalism's got to be ended, why have you not built an alternative. And because I think by doing it, you start to see what are some of the inherent problems in those systems or ways of doing it, and then maybe you'll come up with the solutions, right? But again, I think the way you do it is if people had co-ops going, and then they could look at them and see, oh, that co-op, why would I not support it? It's just like my grocery store. It's got better service and better policies. Of course, I'm going to go there.
Excellent. Well, thanks a lot, Brian. I appreciate your point of view and your activism. Obviously, you were a founding member of the Green Party, so you've been with us a long time and have a lot of knowledge to incite to the rest of us, sir. Thanks a lot, and we'll talk to you again, all right?
Thank you very much. I appreciate it. Peace.